Wow. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It is 6:30, which is the time for our Community Preservation Committee meeting. If we could begin with a roll call, or basically an attendance call, I guess, of members.
Chairman Bakey.
Present.
Vice Chair Bullock.
Present.
Member Galvin. Member Baez. Member DePeza.
Present.
Member DePeza.
He's on the Zoom.
Present.
Yeah.
Member Butnick.
Present.
Member Shea. Member Roy.
Present. So we have some audio issues to work out over here. We were hearing you on your computer, so you should probably mute yourself there.
Okay.
I unmuted, because my voice is going to get picked up today.
All right.
All right, cool.
All right. So the first order of business this evening is the minutes from the December 15th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve? Member Shea, do we have a second? Second. Member Fuller, or Vice Chair Fuller? Any discussion, comments, corrections? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. So our primary order of business this evening is the deliberations and vote on the 2022 CPA applications. This is the Community Preservation Commission?
Yeah.
Yep. This is the Community Preservation Committee. If that's the meeting you're looking for, you're in the right place. If you are looking for the Community Preservation Committee, you are in the right place. Yep. All right. So,
Yeah, pack it in.
Like on the ground.
so this evening's primary order of business is deliberations and a vote on the 2022 CPA applications. The Community Preservation Committee will deliberate on all CPA applications submitted for the current application cycle. At the conclusion of deliberations, the CPC will vote on funding recommendations, which will be sent to the City Council for approval. A couple of sort of general framing comments here. This is not a public hearing. This is a meeting for the committee members to discuss and deliberate on the applications, but we do appreciate that we have representatives from many of the applicants here to observe this evening. We have a total of $985,082 available to distribute. We are required to allocate a minimum of 10% of that funding to open space projects, a minimum of 10% of that funding to historic preservation projects, a minimum of 10% of that funding to community housing projects, and the balance can be distributed to any projects in any of those categories. The CPC is not actually required to distribute all of that funding. If the members feel that it makes sense to reserve funding for future years, that is something the committee has the option to propose. The City Council will have the ultimate authority whether or not to appropriate the funds for the recommendations made by this committee, but the City Council cannot appropriate funds for a project that is not recommended by this committee without asking the committee to reconsider. The City Council can choose whether or not to appropriate funds for what we recommend, but the City Council cannot choose to appropriate funds for something this committee did not recommend. So, we do have comments that were submitted in advance by one of the members who was unable to attend this evening. So what we will do is, as we go through and have a committee discussion of each of the applications, I'll just read into the record the comments made by Member Liang, so that all the other members have the benefit of having them they are on the record as well as part of it. What we did last year, we don't have to do it again the same way, but it seemed to work pretty well. What we did last year was to actually go through and talk about each application and then start to have a discussion after we've had a chance to talk about all of them, about how we, what we want to actually propose in terms of action on each of them. So do we have anybody feel, any questions, or anybody feel we should do anything a little different on that?
That worked well last year.
Okay. Well, we will go ahead and start that. The first application we have before us is submitted by the City of Lowell for O'Donnell Park, which is an open space and outdoor recreation project. The funding request is actually for $1.668 million, which is obviously a little more than the funds that are even available. The scope of work includes resurfacing of a basketball court, replacing equipment, resurfacing a tennis court, replacing equipment, installation of a new accessible playground with a poured-in-place rubber surface, irrigation for the baseball field and replacing the bleachers, installation of an outdoor classroom, and installation of a painted path and signage. And they acknowledge that work will be completed in phases as funding is available, and there may indeed be other sources of funding attached to this in addition to what they're looking for from this committee. So do we have any comments or discussion on that? Actually, I should read what Member Liang had to say about it. He commented on two projects together, this one and the other City Park project. He said these are outstanding projects from the city. Unfortunately, we can't fund two projects from the city with limited funds. I would ask the city to choose which project they'd like us to move forward with. If they cannot choose, I am in favor of Donahoe Park. Funding options, bond phase funding. I believe we did ask that question of the applicant when it was presented, and the applicants identified that the O'Donnell Park was the priority of the two at the time. So I guess other members, comments on the O'Donnell Park application?
I would just say that the other thing that sort of was discussed at the meeting was just an acknowledgement that the request was quite a lot, and that of the full request, that the playground portion of it specifically was the priority. So if there's a decision not to fully fund this particular request, that you know, we could consider funding that like particular piece of the project, because it would still kind of create a finished product instead of like just a partial thing. So and that was stated by the city representative at the meeting. So that's just something to keep in mind as we discuss that. And that was also true for the next one as well. They identified the playground piece, but Adam is correct that the city did, of the two, put preference towards O'Donnell Park.
The other.
Was the estimate broken out so that we know how much the playground piece was?
I have it because it came out of my department. But yeah,
I did submit it.
it was submitted as a part of the application. It was roughly $600,000.
I agree with Member Lang that I think both of these are outstanding projects, but they're obviously $2.4 million total together. So I kind of defer to the city's comment saying that the O'Donnell Park is a priority, and that perhaps I'm generally in support of the $600,000 towards the playground. I wanted to note, I missed the first couple meetings, or the first couple minutes, but I don't think that's,
You didn't miss anything.
I don't think I missed anything. But I did want to point out, just as a general comment, that I thought the city planning staff did a great job at in outreach in 2021 and 2022. And I think it's been consistent that the priority from the community has been open space and community housing. So I just wanted to say kind of as a general comment that I'm supportive very much of funding those tonight.
Any other comments on this one at this point?
I agree with the O'Donnell being a little bit more priority. I think it'll be used more, so a little more accessible to people. It's more visible. I know them pretty well. You know, anytime you say irrigation for baseball, I generally like that. But I think that if you had to pick one thing, I do agree that the playground would be great, especially with the new accessible playgrounds. I think those have been well received throughout the city. So if we partially fund that, even if we not the whole 600 or whatnot, I'd be in favor of that.
Do you have a figure that you'd like to recommend towards Dawn?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. I think,
What portion of the request, are we talking about
Well-
with respect to?
well, I think we have a number of options at our disposal. We could recommend funding it some amount in this year. We could recommend funding some amount this year and actually pre-allocating some funding for next year. We could recommend bonding for this, to get to a larger amount. We did do that with a couple of projects last year. I think we should be a little cautious about doing too much of that. And the city council, I'm sure, will be a little cautious about doing too much of that. But that's a possibility as well. We could fund a certain amount in this year and encourage them to look for alternative sources and then come back next year and compete next year if there's a need for more at that point. It's another possibility. And I think it would be beneficial to go through and hear about all of them before we start talking about specific numbers for any, because that sort of gives just an unfair advantage to the ones that come first on the list.
According to the comments from DPD, the playground section and its related expenses add up to $430,000. That's from the comments out of this.
And the escalation then is why.
Yeah.
That might make sense.
What about inflation, Brad?
Is it poured in place? It needs to be
Because
included.
I took the budget separately and added the, design and engineering cost and the construction fee, just do it 20% of the construction cost, that's why in the original proposal, it adds up to 400,000, so when you break it out separately, it would be like another
5,600?
600,000.
That's how you get to the
Okay.
600,000.
Good, fine.
The soft cost.
Just want to give Member DePesa, who's on the Zoom, do you have any comments on this one, or?
Yes, so I mean, yes, I am in favor of, pushing, some portion of the O'Donnell Park forward. Yeah, I mean, open space, playgrounds, whatnot. I mean, just from living in the area, I think, especially that park, yeah, if it gets revitalized, I think it'd be a huge help in the community.
All right. Our next project that's before us or proposed is Donahoe Park, which again, we started to touch on a little bit because they're obviously interrelated here a little bit, also submitted by the City of Lowell. This one is an $802,500 request with a scope of work that's not dissimilar to the one we had before. Accessible playground, irrigate the baseball field, replace and add benches, picnic tables and trash cans, extend the sidewalk, plant additional trees, install a rain garden, and install multilingual signage. And as with the other one, they acknowledged that they could phase the project as funding's available, and we've already discussed how that if they had to choose, they would prefer prioritize the first one. Any other comments or discussion on Donahoe Park?
Given its proximity to Shed Park, I can understand the city's stance on maybe deferring to O'Donnell Park. Just an observation.
Yeah, this is one that's on like the backside of the pine,
It's
right?
also known as
Correct.
Stratum.
Yeah.
It's on just like off Stratum Street.
Can you drive there through
Yes.
Shed Park?
Well, no, you have to
No.
go down Lawrence Street and where Jerry's Food Store is, take a turn up the hill there, go
Epping,
over
I
the
think.
railroad tracks and
I don't think anyone's ever, baseball perspective, I don't think anyone's ever used that field in a long time.
They used it years ago
Yeah.
for T-ball and softball and, minor league baseball.
It's a really nice neighborhood park. It's been, not updated in a really long time, which is, I think, why the planning department has put some eyes on it recently. But just because of its location and access, in a realm where we're having to make kind of hard decisions, that's why the decision was made to think about prioritizing O'Donnell, which is in a much, more popular location and more
Mhm.
recognized and used actively at this point than by the community.
Have any other comments about Donahoe Park? Okay, see Member DePesa shaking his head too, so, all right. Okay, the next project we have before us,
On the next item is item number 3.
Yep.
I'd like to recuse myself from discussion, voting, being the chair of housing.
makes sense to make sure that's in the record, Dylan, that Member Shea is not participating with respect to the Hadley House. So the third project before us is the only project that has been submitted under the category of community housing this year. It is the Hadley House. The applicant is the Lowell Housing Authority, requesting $150,000 for a scope of work that includes the creation of 5 new affordable units that would be for veterans housing. The work will also restore the historic Hadley House located at 719 Broadway Street. That has been, I'm going to editorialize slightly, it's been vacant for a very long time. Do we have comments on that?
From a code official standpoint, it would be great to see this rehab only because of the time spent trying to close it, because people are breaking in constantly, and Lord knows we need the housing in the city. So I think it makes sense to allot them some money to work towards getting that restored.
When it first came across our desk, I was concerned about the permitting phase and the precedent that it would set if we were to fund this project. That said, you know, the housing is certainly, I think, our greatest need in the city, and at the request level, which it's at, we could satisfy the full request for just over the annual allocation. So, you know, especially because there are no other applicants for community housing, I would support.
Are there any updates to both the ownership status and the permitting status?
They did not, we had asked them to submit anything that they might have, and we did not receive anything from them that's changed since, I think it was late October when they presented.
I like this one, and it's one of those things I call them the connector neighborhoods. It's like you have like UMass Lowell, and you have sort of like the what I call like the greater acre area, and you have sort of that middle part there where that canal is and where this is. So revitalizing that sort of kind of would have a nice ripple effect on that area. So there's sort of a, you know, an extra, you know, it's just a positive impact, more than just that building itself, just sort of that little neck of the woods. I think that would be a great addition.
Something to take into consideration as well is that the Merrimack Valley Food Bank building has been vacated, will be vacated, and that is scheduled to be redeveloped for, I want to say, anywhere between 40 and 50 units. So it'll be adding a lot of housing, but the Merrimack Valley Food Bank site there'll be conditions for the parking over there, so I don't think the Hadley House has to worry about as much about the parking component of the redevelopment or the restoration of it.
I would just say, so to echo, you know, the concern about their lack of permitting, like being in the permitting process, I was also concerned about that. I think that if a recommendation is made to fund them, that clearly it would, you know, include that language about like requiring all the necessary permits and, but I think in Lowell, net new units, just in general, I think we all know is something that's like important for the community. And then as Dave just mentioned, the Merrimack Valley Food Bank site is going to be redeveloped into housing. And so, you know, having a really nice new building and
Historic.
and another building that's sort of not so great adjacent, for having the opportunity to see both sites renovated and turned into housing as an asset to the community, I think is kind of an exciting prospect. And given their request, the level that they came in at, I like this project a lot.
I as well.
I agree, I'm in support of this project, and even though it's under the community housing category, I think it can also be kind of viewed through the lens of a historic rehab, and so for that reason, I'm in support of this project.
Member DePesa, do you have any comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything I heard for sure, just because the housing need. it's real and low, and these 5 units could really, could really help. And yeah, I would want to prioritize the funding on this one.
I do want to read Member Liang's comment, which is, this project is needed in the city. We need more affordable housing. There's also one project for this category, and I favor funding this project as much as possible, with the completion of funds in 2 phases if the applicant agrees. And I would just add one other thing for us to think about on this one, which is that the site plan that they presented to us impacted the community, or the canalway path that ran through along there, and I think we would want to see, as our responsibility extends to cover housing, open space and recreation, and historic preservation, and I think we would want to ensure that path is maintained in some manner that is compatible with the rest of the development, if we were to support this one as a key kind of recreational element for Lowell. Any other comments on that one?
Agreed on that.
Probably the hot topic for this evening, based on the people who are in attendance in the audience, is historic preservation. We have 3 projects that have been submitted under historic preservation. The first one is the St. George's Church Dome. The applicant is the St. George's Parish Council. The funding request is for $500,000. The scope of work includes the restoration of the historic dome of St. George's Church at 44 Princeton Boulevard. And I'll wait and read Member Liang's comments all together, because he just lumped them together. So we have comments on this one.
I have an overall concern about the viability of the estimate and the overall project cost. I recognize the historic nature of the building, but I think comparing it against even the other 2 historic preservation projects, I think it has kind of the least community impact, even though there is a architectural and historic impact. I think just comparing it, I'm less inclined to be in favor of this project.
Any other comments from any members? Member Shea?
I don't mind just adding to the discussion. First of all, I thought the presentation was excellent. I'm not too sure how they can do the work that they're asking us to support, because of the degree of difficulty. And I saw that church come about 50 years ago. They happened to live up the street. But putting that aside, I thought their presentation was great, and I support an amount of funding to help them reach their goal of $500,000. It's going to cost much more than that, and I think I also feel very strongly about the citizen participation that showed up at the city council meeting chamber that night. I'm under the impression that I know the community, and I saw some of the community leaders speak up very favorable for this. And so I think that their application should be taken seriously, and I think by awarding them a portion of the money to be granted tonight is a token of our appreciation for what they're trying to accomplish. And I'm not too sure what they're trying to accomplish with that building. I think they have a long road to haul, and I think that they all mentioned that night about the degree of difficulty. So I just want to be on record. I will be supporting, and I look to the chairman of the committee tonight to give us some type of guidance on this. And so, what you asked.
No pressure.
And I appreciate what my colleague here said. She's very articulate. And so I just want to put on the record my 2 cents worth. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a clarifying question that because I'm just new to this. So when people come in for historic preservation requests, could there be funding? The request was to go towards the dome, but I sort of echo the concern that I think the estimate undervalued how much this project is gonna cost. And so I worry about tying up funds on a commitment that might not be able to sort of move forward quickly. And so I guess I'm just wondering, could there be funds for a request like this could there be a recommendation that funding go towards like design engineering? Or we could only make a decision to fund for the very specific thing that they asked for, which was like the rehab work itself?
Well, I
Does
think,
that make sense?
yeah, no, it does
Okay.
make sense. A couple of comments on that. I think, well, one, taking a step back, I believe we were told that, and I think it was in their application, that they also have, I think, 800,000 in an insurance settlement that is contributing to this project as well. So they're not only looking for the CPA funds to fund the whole project. I do think that it is an eligible expense to cover engineering and design services in conjunction with the project. I'm a little nervous about whether we would be well-served, even if it's okay,
Yeah.
to only fund design or only fund some form of soft costs on a project and not necessarily have, again, even if it's an eligible and legal use, it really isn't achieving the spirit of what we're here for and what the funding is for, to not have the end result be actual historic preservation. Although that said, I'm sure this is one where there's an opportunity to do some, as with many of these, even like the park projects we were talking about before, there's a scope of work they want to do. There probably is a smaller scope of work that they can do if that's the funding that they have available to them. And the other thing I just would add on this one is there was in the comments that we've received from the historic board, my impression, and I guess maybe Member DePesa may have something to say as the representative from the historic board, but my impression was that the historic significance of that dome may be greater than the historic significance of some of the other projects that are before us. There may be other significant merits around economic development, community development, and so forth for the others. But from a purely historic architecture perspective, that actually may be a significant one. So.
Yeah,
Do
no,
we know if there's?
sorry. No, I was gonna say, no, that is correct. And I'm sort of torn here because I think with that type of project, the restoration costs, honestly, between soft and hard costs, I think it's going to be more than that. And so the whole cost overruns, I'm just a little hesitant there. And again, if we want to start that project, which would be great, but then not really having the sufficient funding to finish it, as someone said earlier, and then have those funds tied up that can go somewhere else. So again, I'm totally in support of it, not just for the historic, part of it as well. But yeah, there's still that concern that the project may really cost significantly more than what may be anticipated.
Beyond the insurance money and the 500,000 that they're seeking, is there an active fundraising campaign going on within the church to make these repairs? Are we aware of that?
Well, here I guess we have a procedural question that I would like to ask the members, which are comfortable with. While this is not a public hearing, I believe we do have people who probably can answer that question if we wish to ask it, but we are opening the door at that point that we'll probably have a lot of discussion with the audience in general if we do that.
In fairness, we did allow the city representative in the room to add some clarifying information, so I would be personally comfortable asking the representatives that are here for this project to answer specific questions, such as the one that Dave brought up.
Second.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. So then you all heard the question.
We don't have any active fundraising effort at the moment. As was just said, we have the insurance, settlement funding, and, we came with a request from the CPA, Community Preservation Act Committee, for the remainder. The estimate a year and a half ago was 1.2 something million. So that if you had the two together, you come up to, that amount. That estimate is about a couple of years old.
Can share a little not very good news for you. I do this kind of work for the university in my day job, and what we are seeing is anywhere between 12 and 16% annual cost escalation on projects like this right now. So I know that's not making your project any easier, but a 2-year-old estimate is definitely going to be short right now. So.
Yeah, could I ask,
Absolutely.
Father, could I just ask you? Yes. Could you just tell us again what you anticipate for the total cost of the project? Just the ballpark figure. I can only go with what, was, estimated, in 2019, 2020, when that was, done by a company called Vertex, an engineering company. They estimated, 1.2 million and change, something. And it would be the, a dome replacement, as well as underlying structures and some asbestos mitigation. And replacing, I don't have all the details in front of me, but underlying structure that was damaged with the water.
But your outreach would be to have a fundraising drive sometime in the future.
We would have to, but we
So-
would have to.
So if by chance this committee approved by the council was to award you a token, wouldn't you use that as a reference in your fundraising drive?
Certainly we would. I'm sure that.
So no matter what amount of money we set aside, I think they could use that as a selling point, because what they'd be saying to the public is that this committee, with the expertise that's in this room, approve of them. It's going to, in my judgment, it's going to like verify the project. It's going to help them with their fundraising, which would take, I don't know what it's going to take. It's going to take a long time. So I can see why they'd ask for a vote of approval of some funding. And I would think that it's going to be quite a while, and their cost is, I mean, it's a difficult project. And I don't know how to bang a nail into a piece of wood. Believe me, I can read a balance sheet, but I can't bang a nail into a piece
The
of wood.
balance sheet reading may be more valuable these days.
So I go to my friend, the chairman, who does a lot of work. I'm just looking for advice, but I just want to like advocate for their cause. Like I said, I lived up in that district for 30 years, so I know the church. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Is there like a statute of limitations on our funding? Or is it just, it's gone?
Well, we have a fair amount of discretion on how we might condition a recommended award. So we could, whether it's a good idea or not, that's for the committee to decide, but we could say we're willing to reserve X amount of dollars for a particular project, and if the project does not move forward in 2 years, 5 years, 3 years, whatever, that money would be returned for consideration in that year, for distribution in that year, or redistribution in that year if it doesn't move forward. That is an option we have with really any of these, or any project we have before us.
I'm new to this as well, so, can we place contingencies, or is that something that is considered when, awarding grants to these things?
It can, absolutely. Yeah, there are, we obviously don't want to put contingencies on a project that make it infeasible, but we could do all sorts of things. We can require, like we just discussed with the previous one, we could require that they have permits before the money is actually able to be spent. We could require various things. In this case, we have to require, there are two things we have to require. For housing projects, we have to require a housing affordability restriction. And for historic preservation requirement projects, we have to require a historic preservation restriction on the property. And I guess there's still an open debate about whether it can be a portion of the property or the entirety of the property. But other than that, I think everything is, we have some latitude and we can frame those recommendations. And again, we're making recommendations. We're not actually appropriating the funds. That's the role of the city council. Any other discussion on this one, or should we move to the next? All right, our next one, which also has a representative here, is 635 Middlesex Street. Is also a historic preservation project submitted by RG Realty LLC. They are also asking for $500,000. The scope of work is the restoration of the historic building located at 635 Middlesex Street, including the restoration of the brick facade and structural work. We have,
Actually, it's just 186,000. I revised that number.
oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Anyone else want to reduce their request?
Yeah. A little bit different now.
Yeah.
Since we met last time, we've been, we did the interior demo, and that was all signed off on by the building department. We're also waiting on architectural plans, for the 3 units inside. Those aren't done yet, but we're pretty close. I had a conversation with the architect the other day, and, he said they're almost done. At least I was hoping I'd have some plans I could bring you today. But it's gonna be pretty simple, 2 residential units and 1 commercial space.
Well, this is not another presentation session.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is nor a public hearing, so this is really the deliberation of the board.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If the board members have questions, it's great that you're here, and we will have them, they will ask them of you.
Sorry.
And frankly, I do appreciate your clarifying the amount of the request. That actually is really helpful.
Yeah,
Very helpful.
We do appreciate that. But I'd like to let the board members
Yeah.
ask questions if they have them, as well as raise their comments here first.
So that's great news. Just a couple things that I sort of want to mention, that I'm sure we're all aware of. The folks at the Boys and Girls Club are currently going through about an $11 million project, to renovate their property, which is in very close proximity. You know, and I think anytime you have a massive project of that scale, the things adjacent start to show their age. And so, you know, that, to me, that's just something that I have in mind when thinking about the location of this particular property. And then also, again, it's a historic preservation project, but bringing some units back online that have been out of for a number of years. And this particular location does have a retail component on the first floor. So for like an economic development perspective, it's nice to have the potential reactivation of a space that has been vacant for a number of years. So given the change in the amount being requested too, you know, it's just it's an interesting project to consider, and it's, I just wanted to mention those points.
That's great.
It's important that it has those multi-functions. It's kind of like a triple threat, where it satisfies, while it's in one category, it satisfies a number of them. It also meets my connector thing, where it's like, we're trying to get downtown to connect to other areas. You know, that's one of the main driving behind the, you know, Florida overpass or the Big Phil or whatever you want to call it. Like having that area sort of as a, you know, walkability from the courthouse over to that neck of the woods in the Lower Highlands. So I think with the mentioning the Boys Club project, like having that area revitalized, I think is important. So, and this is a small piece of it, but I think it's an important piece of it.
Membership?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say for the record that I can remember the gentleman's presentation. I did it virtually. It might have been a night that I was listening, but you couldn't hear me.
I sort of remember that, yeah.
Or you said Shay's in, push the button, whatever it may be.
Figure me out.
It's good to see him again. I don't know the gentleman, but I thought the presentation was pretty good that night. And being part of the fundraising effort to build the Boys Club 100 years ago, I know that area pretty well, and so I'm gonna look for your judgment on this thing, but if something can be done, once again, here's an outside guy coming into the community, making a tremendous investment. At least I'm quite sure he's not from the Low area, but once again, if we can do something to encourage people like this to restore a building such as that, I think the word goes out, and, but that's all. I just want to say that for the record. I didn't have an opportunity, months ago when he made his presentation, but I thought his presentation, sitting in my, house watching the show, I did complain to the chairman. I said, geez, I couldn't get in. I didn't blame Dylan. Shay's trying to get in.
Well, odds are it's my fault.
Hey, I just want to say that for the record. I'm not too sure.
That it's my fault, or?
There's only so much money to going around, but I do think that, once again, I think we ought to be encouraging our developers to continue to invest in our city. That's all.
I have to say, I feel a lot better given the new price. The $500,000 was rather excessive, but this is definitely it's a good project.
I'm generally supportive of this project for all the reasons that the other members mentioned tonight. I'm in full agreement.
No problem. Member DePace?
Yeah, no, I am in
Comment?
support of the project, from the program standpoint, adding some housing, the commercial space, some form of economic engine. And so, yeah, I think it's going to add value to the immediate area. So I support it.
I commented on what I thought was what set the first one apart. What I think sets this one apart is its visibility. I think of these three, though, this one is in the location that is most prominent in terms of if any one of these three buildings were completely restored, this is the one that would be more visible to more people, or to the most people of the three, I think, and that's certainly a reason to think about it. I do have one question for the applicant. I cut off your presentation earlier, but I have a question for you. This committee last year provided funding to the Lowell Development Financial Corporation to support private projects for historic preservation, not unlike what this feels like to me. I don't know if you've had a chance to
Allison.
reach out to them. Yep.
Yeah. So Lowell 5 will be doing the construction end of the loan, and then Allison hopefully will be doing the permanent loan.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
So hopefully it all my calculations are correct, and that's the plan right now.
Okay. So would that be through their historic preservation, the Community Preservation Act funded historic preservation program, or through their development fund, or
I haven't
do you not know at this point?
I haven't spoken with Allison at length about it yet, but she told me that I do need money for the construction loan end of it, and working with Lowell 5 would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then she told me that they do more the permanent loan end of it. So they're not gonna give me money for the construction, but they'll be doing the permanent loan. That was my understanding, but we just had a brief conversation.
Okay, all right. Well, I do encourage you, regardless of how this plays out tonight, I definitely encourage you to follow up further and particularly ask about the historic preservation fund that this committee funded last year, or that recommended funding, the city funded community preservation.
Is she the person
The Lowell Development Financial Corporation that Allison is the director of has that pot of money, and it's intended to support the very same kinds of projects that we would grant funds for. It is a loan, it's not a grant, and I don't know what the terms are, but it is a way, and it would be able to play the same role in the project that any grant we gave would. So it
Okay.
wouldn't have to wait until the construction loan is taken out to be potentially of service for you. There may be other reasons, there may be other, conditions or constraints that make it, challenging for them, but I would definitely encourage you to specifically ask about that program,
Fund.
if you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, well, thank you. Any other comments on this one, or should we talk about the next one? We have one more application before us, which is from Girls Inc., also in the historic preservation category. The funding request is for $250,000 to support the restoration of the historic structure at 228 Worthen Street. Girls Inc. will be expanding into the space. The funds will be used for windows, siding, doors, and roofing, as well as the landscaping and garden. And we have a note that says, if funded, this funding would need to come from the general reserve or open space outdoor recreation funds. So I think what we're being advised there is that we could not, if the only historic preservation project we wanted to support was this Girls Inc. project, that work on the landscaping and gardening would not be eligible for the $98,000 that must be reserved for historic preservation. But it could be eligible potentially as an open space project. There is a condition that we're required to place on open space projects, which is that it does need to be open to the public. It can't just be a nice landscaped area on private property. It has to actually be a resource that is available to the public if we were to fund on that basis. So as we have with the others, any questions from the members on this one, or comments? Thoughts?
I would say that I'm very supportive of this project. I think it has a lot of programmatic impact to the community, I think generationally as well. I don't know off the top of my head when Girls Inc. was founded or when the building, when that program went in there, but I would just say it has a lot of programmatic impact. I also think they're leveraging a lot of other funds, which a lot of other projects are tonight as well. But I think the total budget for this project is like $1.5 million. So I think kind of the ratio to me makes a lot of sense. This seems to be bridging a gap in the project.
Last year, this was one of 2 projects that we didn't fund out of a list of 11 or 13. They've revised their application. It seems to be much more fitting of the requirements that we look for funding. We gave some money to the Whistler House across the street last year. Being able to do a full-scale kind of facelift on Worthen Street is something that I would really look forward to. It's, a road that people come to when they, come to Lowell from out of town, and to have that look its best would, great, especially that this building in particular is very visible from not only Worthen Street, but Thorndike as well.
I'd like to just go on record and say, and I support the project also, and I would just defer to the chairman for a number. That's all.
I may disappoint you, but
We're gonna hear from Adam.
I agree with everyone. I think this is one of my favorite ones, one of the really great organizations in the city. And to, like, as Brad said, to really restore that area, that building, for a history buff, that's been there for one of the longest, that area is really one of the oldest parts of Lowell. To have that still standing, you can almost see the Smith Baker Center across the street. That it's, who knows what's going to happen with that, but to keep some of these, older buildings vibrant and alive, and not just for that they look nice, but they're being utilized for a great program and so again, a lot of these have multiple, things that sort of check the boxes for me. So, yes, landscaping and facade, historical, but just a great overall organization that's helping out the community on the inside as well. So, big fan.
I would hone in on that kind of landscaping section a little bit. If we find that we are comfortable granting this full value, then that would mean that we would have 2 public parks on the same street. That it's
sort of, yeah.
sort of.
It would have to technically become basically a public park, but this is a very small landscaped area outside.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's concentration is definitely a good argument here,
Yeah.
in favor.
It being that size, it's hard to justify, but, you know, by kind of, it is an interesting idea of having public open space throughout this area, just in general.
Yep.
But I don't know that the size of this one really warrants that extra cost.
One thing I was thinking as I was kind of, again, just knowing that we have more requests than we have money, and knowing that landscaping often is like, you know, the thing that comes at the end of a project, that timing-wise, that perhaps the landscaping and open space portion of this not be funded, and that, you know, we stick to what we can fund directly through historic preservation, and if Girls Inc. is interested in it being, and that space acting as like public open space, then that's a request that they could consider coming back for in the future.
I like that. That makes sense.
Do we know the amount broken out for landscape?
We did receive that, I don't actually have it in front of me, but
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess we can ask the applicant.
It's 115 landscaping and 135 for all of the other stuff, the windows, siding.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely worth coming. All right. Any other comments? Member DePaisa, I want to make sure you don't get.
Yeah, no, I am in favor of the project. I remember seeing this project and it's great. It's come back around, and yeah, I think we should, yeah, definitely fund it.
And I'll share Member Liang's comments on the historic preservation projects. He said these are all good and important projects for the city. I support projects 4, 5, and 6. Is there another breakdown to see the actual budgets, itemized items, to see whether they fit in our funding criteria, which I think we've been talking a little bit about. Shortage of funding is the only problem. Alt financing options should be guided, as the prolonging of inadequate funding will leave these historic sites beyond disrepair. So, we have a challenge before us, certainly. I think I've heard a lot of good things about all of these, which is, they all are very meritorious projects. One way we might approach this is to look at the 3 pots where we have a requirement that we have to allocate a certain amount to each of these categories. Now, in the event we did not have any project we wish to allocate funding for, which I think based on what I'm hearing is unlikely, in any of those categories, that's okay. What would happen is that funding couldn't be used for something else. So that funding would get reserved, it would be available next year, but it would still be restricted to whatever category we did not fund. So if we decided for whatever reason that we didn't want to fund any of the historic preservation projects this year, $98,000 would have to be reserved and then put into the pot next year. And next year's historic preservation pot would be $98,000 richer, but the general pot next year would not be, any more so than this year would be. The general fund portion, the 600,000 or so, is available for any of the projects or under any of the categories. So I don't know if we have, maybe we start with the easier one of those pots where there's no competition. Do we feel that it makes sense? I think that's a kind of a yes or no question. Do we feel that it makes sense to allocate at least $98,000 to the Hadley House project, or should we reserve the community housing money? I think that's the first simple question. And I understand Member Shea is going to be abstaining from this discussion on this one.
I would allocate whatever funds we have available.
Any sense on that? So we should be planning on at least the $98,000 for that. Then the, again, because it's perhaps a little bit simpler because we only have one applicant, even though there's 2 projects. For the parks money, we also have, again, parks and open space. We have a $98,000 minimum. I think we heard from the applicant as well as committee, the general consensus being that the O'Donnell Park is the higher priority of two important projects. Is it a good idea to say at least $98,000 wants to go to O'Donnell Park?
Yes.
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 Okay. Then historic preservation, obviously a little trickier, but we have 98,000. I guess the first threshold question is, are we supportive enough of one or more of these projects that we don't want to bank the 98,000?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, is there a project that,
Mr. Chair, if
Yeah.
I may,
please,
I would like to see St. George's start a capital, fundraising effort on their part before we commit. They can always come back next year. But as we know, their estimate's 2 years old. They're gonna be short by quick, calculation today, I would say at least $500,000. So we need to see an effort on their part to, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just thinking that, if they can demonstrate that they've raised money themselves, then we can, I don't want to say not take this more seriously. They're very serious about it, but, where there's a need for 2 other projects, I would just, my opinion would be to instruct the, dome preservation, out a year.
It's unfortunate because of the recognition that this property should receive, but I do agree with you. This is a lot of money we're talking about here. And, the realization of realer costs would be, they're frightening.
Yeah.
Scale. This is a scary project.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and I think out of at least these 3, it's the only one that's not leveraging other funds at the moment.
That's a good point.
again, they have their 800,000 insurance.
Oh, and insurance money, yeah.
But to the point that you made at the very beginning, which was the suggestion that they do need to spend a little more on soft engineering and cost estimating, maybe they should use some of the money they do have at their disposal that is discretionary, essentially. It's in their insurance settlement to clarify a little better what they need. And, yeah, again, asking them to come back next year when they're a little more together and maybe have some fundraising under their belt is perfectly a reasonable ask or a reasonable request on our part of them. But on the other hand, again, it is a pretty significant resource, and part of our, this is not the, sort of the community development block grant program. It's really this area in particular, it's about preserving historic resources. And so that, I guess, is the argument for what they're trying to do, although that is true of all of them, in different ways.
Jim, would you just explain to me, I'm sure the committee understands it, but I'm not too sure I understand it. If we make an award and they don't show progress, you just take it back a year from now or 2 years from now, and you put a stipulation on.
We could do that. Obviously, as I'm sure you do know, if they actually spend it, it would be very difficult for this committee to claw it back if they didn't somehow complete the project. What we would be buying with that, though, would be a permanent historic preservation restriction on the property. And that would be our sort of protection.
Okay, then I misunderstood something you said earlier. I thought that you said that we could put if you don't spend the money, okay.
If they don't spend it, if they don't spend it, yeah, we absolutely could claw it back. But if they did, and yet they didn't
I want to go back
deliver.
to what I mumbled 40 minutes or so ago about trying to encourage the committee. I think by awarding them money to be put aside will help their fundraising effort. Going to help their fundraising effort, I'm sure, because they can say with certainty that the low supports this project. That's a big selling point. But I'm going to end it there. So I think I've said plenty on this, but I'm just going on the record to indicate my thoughts, and apparently
At the level that we're talking about, I would like to see that capital campaign get started, that we could then add to and help build momentum.
when it gets started, I think the fact that the committee has endorsed their plan is going to I suspect would help them raise $1 million they need, or $1.5 million, whatever it is, the substantial amount of money. But to say, but to take a point of view, we want to see how well they're doing, well, we can help them, I think indirectly with their fundraising effort.
I think you're right
By,
about that, I guess.
by showing support. And if you take this item off the table and you don't support their effort, and you push it off for another year, I mean, support is worth, I think a vote of this committee is an avenue for them to go out and raise their $1 million or $1.5 million that they need. And to say no, or to postpone it, as has been suggested by the gentleman from Lowell, that could be a negative, you know, in their fundraising effort. And this is my concern. It isn't the amount of money that you put aside, it's just a question of, if you put aside $5,000, they can say, we get support from this committee. And I think this committee carries a lot of weight with the community, as it was proven when we voted for the $1.4 million for the land out there on Barnum Avenue, whatever it was. And it just has a lot of weight. But to send a signal out there on Merrimack Street that we move off of that, it's a negative.
Mhm.
And we saw the father who I don't even know, the two people, but that night at the city council chamber, there was a among those women that were there, they're pretty involved in the community. And to be involved in something like that, to me, that spoke volumes. So just to pass it off, I think everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I respect it, and I can see where this is going. But I think you're making a mistake if you don't put aside a few dollars. Because putting aside a few dollars is, I think, the real key, that's a key selling point as they go out to the community. And there's some of the parishioners at Paris, I mentioned you, I think I know a couple of them, they're very substantial guys. And I think that's probably where the bulk of the money's gonna come from. But you can raise the money, but can you do the work? I don't know. I just want that to be in the record, because I have a feeling where this is going. Only one vote out of 12, so that's basically it.
I think, I completely agree with your line of thinking that, the endorsement that comes from the city, recommended by this committee and appropriated by the council, supporting a project is definitely significant in attracting other funding. I think that's going to be true of many projects before us this year and into the future. My slight pushback on that is they have an estimate from more than 2 years ago, and yet they told us they haven't even started a fundraising campaign. Seems, what makes us think they're going to start, you know, substantial and meaningful fundraising now? I mean, it just, why didn't they start it earlier? Because it's just a question. They knew they did enough to learn that they had a gap that was pretty significant between the insurance money they had and the work they needed to do. And then they didn't really do anything, and as far as I know, as far as what they've told us, until
I can just
they
reply
asked
to
here, yeah.
I think that's a very interesting journey of thought. However, my suggestion to you would be, why didn't you ask those questions when you were here? I would have asked those questions. But nonetheless, the fact that they showed up and they're trying to do something to that piece of property up there, that's a little, I mean, yeah, I mean, I could ask a lot of questions, it would be a Monday morning quarterback also. But the bottom line is simply, I was impressed by their presentation. More importantly, some of those women in that that showed up that night, very active in the community, from all different angles. That gave me a lot of credibility for what you're trying to accomplish, but just to nonchalantly, well, that's a bad word, but let's just say we may have a difference of opinion. Thank you.
Any other comments on that one at the moment? We, I guess we have a couple of different ways we can move forward here. We can suggest where to put the first 98,000 of historic preservation money, or we could actually make some initial proposals for what to do with, assuming that we are going to award at least 98,000 in historic preservation money, we could just start thinking about how much might the committee want to allocate to each of these projects and see where we are and work backwards from there. I'm sure the first round will be over, but maybe we'll work backwards in order up from the bottom. Is there an interest from the committee in what we might award to the Girls Inc. project?
I would propose that we award the $98,000 for the Girls Inc. project, and it's only a $37,000 gap, for the building portion of that. So I would be in support of funding the whole $135,000 for the building. And then I liked your recommendation, Giovanni, that maybe they come back in a year for the landscape piece. Consider whether that's gonna be a public open space, in perpetuity. But I'm support of the project, but specifically the building piece at this time.
Any other?
You stole my pitch. I think anything we can do to help the girls' club, boys' club, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I agree with that approach too. I think that makes the most sense.
I think I'll ultimately, let's try to reach a general consensus around a total, and we'll vote on the total rather than voting on yes or no of the individual projects. But the next one up the list would be the 635 Middlesex Street historic preservation request, and the request is 186,000, not 500,000. We have a thought about what we might want to at least initially propose for that one.
So, I think that I would propose a remainder sum here with, some other values being taken into account. So $600,000 in open space for project number 1, the full 150 for Hadley House, 135 for Girls Inc., and 635 gets whatever's left. I can do the math.
You want to do the math real quick?
Yeah.
I've been trying to do that too.
So there's $100,000.
So it's 600, you said 150 for Hadley House, that's 750. You said 135 for Girls Inc., that's 885. Yeah, there would be then 100,000 left that you would recommend going to 635 Middlesex Street.
That's my vote.
I would be inclined to agree with you.
Yeah.
We have, I don't want to call for a motion quite yet, because I'd like to hear from everybody else, but we're getting close, it sounds like.
I was in the same sort of vein where I was thinking that, to fund, Girls Inc., the 135, Hadley House, the 150, and then the 635 project, the 186, with the remainder, with that 115 sort of delta, going towards O'Donnell, with the possibility of even just a token, $10,000 amount to the Greek Church Dome. So, but yeah, I think the remainder with O'Donnell, because that's going to obviously have funding from other spaces as well. Because I feel like, funding the 635 for that 186 might be more beneficial to that project than shorting the O'Donnell a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we heard the minimum amount at O'Donnell for that playground, and if we're gonna give them $550,000, we should satisfy the complete portion, or at least, fill out the phase so they can get going.
Well, I'd push back a little bit on that. I imagine $500,000 would buy a pretty good playground. It just the one that they designed so far.
I'm in agreement with that, Adam. And they already said that they would leverage other, funding for other parts of the work. So I think even if we were to short the $600,000 a little bit, I think they would still get a really good project. It's a large amount.
My project manager, who's in the room, will probably kill me for saying this, but
She works for you though, so she
we
might
won't,
know.
like if there's a not full $600,000 fund towards this, some less amount would still result in a project. And so, you know, there's not, unless the suggestion was nothing, then we might be in trouble, but I think, with a reasonable sort of amount put towards the request, I'm confident that we'd be able to still walk away and get a project out of it. So I just want to put that in for the record. The Girls Inc., yeah, I think, you know, the full 135 for the actual building, I feel like strongly about. The Hadley House one as well, for the many reasons that we discussed, that I brought up related to, you know, the things that 635 kind of ticks off from my perspective, housing, an economic development component, and a high visibility historic preservation. I feel like I really like this project. I guess I would ask what your thoughts are on what a contribution to the Dome project that you think is enough, that would sort of help
Not a
leverage it.
question enough. Never gonna be able to provide enough based on what I think is the right. No, I just think it's just a total, what?
Like, is $10,000 offensive,
I was
or
gonna
is
say-
that?
No, I was basically gonna say $5,000. I was gonna say, because the chairman did bring out something that I didn't think about. The fact that, you're right, Brad, you give these guys the money and they go out of business. But I'm just talking about a token, and I was thinking probably $5,000. That's in my mind, just so they can say, they can give some validity to their fundraising. And I don't know the priest. I do know some of the women that came, and I don't know the group leaders. But to vote no, that would cast, I don't know, $10,000, that's five more than I would vote. It's a vote of support for their effort to fundraise, to restore this magnificent church that I think, you know, they're gonna have problems.
You're gonna be surprised too, I'm gonna reverse the debate we had.
Can't hear you.
I'm gonna reverse roles in the debate we had a few minutes ago, and I would actually suggest we should give them more than that.
I'm sorry, you know. No, you talk so low, I
Yeah.
can't hear you.
Sorry,
You get to be 81 years old. Anyhow, as you can see, Mr. Chairman.
I am,
I always have that problem.
you just want me to repeat it more times for the record. I would actually recommend we give them a larger amount, and the reason, if we're going to give them funding, I don't think giving them 5 or 10,000 is a good idea. And the reason for that is because any dollar we give them comes with a pretty significant string.
Yeah.
And that string is the historic preservation easement. So I would argue that it is probably not a good idea for us to give anybody less than about $100,000 because, any individual project, because of that putting that historic preservation restriction on the property, really does have, there is a real value / cost to that. And I wouldn't be surprised, if I were them, I would advise them not to accept the 5 or 10,000 and take that with it. So my suggestion, or a suggestion we might want to consider, is to have the O'Donnell Park down around 500 even, do 100,000 toward each of projects 4 and 5, with the suggestion that the developer of 635 Middlesex Street work with the LDFC to use the program we funded to make up that missing 86,000 that they're looking for. And if there are issues or conditions that we may have placed on the LDFC that restrict what they can do, then we maybe encourage a joint return to this committee to talk about those conditions and see if there's a way we can ease them to make it possible.
With no funding for 6?
No, I'm in agreement with the same number that everybody else has been throwing out
Okay.
for 6. I'm just sorting through these missing ones here.
I just make the board aware, for the historic preservation restrictions, as long as you're not acquiring the property, you can put a different, timeline on the loan, not the loan, on the, preservation restriction. It doesn't have to be in perpetuity, it could be for a set period of time, if it's a lower amount of money,
If it's less than what?
whatever the board.
If it's less
Wait.
than the cost of the
You
restriction.
don't need to do a full preservation restriction in perpetuity if you're not purchasing the property.
Okay, okay.
Got it.
Okay.
For like a set, like if you wanna do a lower amount, it could be for, say, 20 years.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, that is great, thank you.
Still don't think $5,000 or $10,000 is
It's worth that
fair.
restriction.
I think we should,
Yeah.
I think if it's either, if we're going to fund it, I think we should give them $100,000, that's fine. But they're just a project at the scale of what they have to undertake. I also think that if one of the goals is to send a message to potential other funders, I actually would be worried about the message that a small funding amount sends, whereas $100,000 sends a message that this is a project that the community supports, and hopefully others would join at similar levels who have the capacity to do so. Any other, don't want that to be the definitive word either. Do we have any other questions or suggestions, rather? We actually do have we have a couple different scenarios that are before us at the moment to consider. I think for the O'Donnell Park project, I've heard, I think we've all agreed at least 98, but I've heard 3 different numbers possibly. One is the 600,000, one is 500,000, and one is 514, because that's how the math works out after you do other projects. Seems to be a general consensus that 150 toward the Hadley House makes sense. There's a discussion of anywhere between 0, 5, 10, or 100 for the St. George's Church. We have proposals for either 100 or 186 for 635 Middlesex, and there seems to be a general emergent consensus about 135 for the Girls Inc. project, which would cover all of their historic preservation scope. Anyone want to make a recommended, sort of package all that up with a specific recommendation?
I'll do
Could
the
you
math
just
here.
include, the Hadley House so I can vote for president?
Oh, yeah, that's true, we should do it. Why don't we do it, since there's
Yeah,
a
that
fair
one
amount of
was
consensus
everybody
around that.
read that one.
Why don't we, do we have a motion to recommend awarding $150,000 to the Hadley House project?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on that? Can we have a roll call on that, Dylan? When you're ready.
Type. Thinking in this periodically.
Yes.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Butenhoff,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Biasrose,
Yes.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Rashay?
and, Member Shea.
Mr. President.
Member DePesa.
Yes.
That motion carries. Maybe we should work through things that we are in full agreement on, I think. So perhaps is there a motion for the full $135,000 historic preservation request for the Girls Inc. project?
So motion.
I second that.
Did you get those? Motion by by Member Fuller, second by Member Baez-Rose, to award $135,000 for the historic preservation scope at the Girls Inc. project. I guess we'll request a roll call when you're ready to do that for us.
Chairman B.
Yes?
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Butenhoff,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Biasrose,
Yes.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member Shea, Member DePesa.
Yes.
Thank you. So now we have 3 projects, and we have almost exactly $700,000 available for the $700,082 to distribute, at least $98,000 of which has to go to O'Donnell Park. Would like to entertain a proposal or even a motion for how we might want to distribute that.
Move.
Al?
You made you wanted a motion? You made
Yep.
the motion?
No, I haven't. I'm not.
Oh.
I'm asking for a motion of how we'd like to distribute the remaining $700,082 between the O'Donnell Park, the St. George's Church, and the 635 Middlesex Street. And I think there's really, it sounds like there's a couple of scenarios that are on the table, and they all ultimately, I think, come down to whether to award money to the St. George's Church and exactly how much to award to the Middlesex Street. And either way, it's going to be a substantial amount to the O'Donnell Park. I think it's everything I've heard here.
Yes.
Does someone want to make a proposal? But I'm looking for whether anybody wants to make a specific proposal.
Can we just kind of decide if we want to fund the church or not?
We can do it that way if you want.
I
Sure.
think that would be the easiest way to kind of do it.
Well, I guess can I ask for a motion, well, do you want a motion to fund the church? At what amount? Vote on.
I still feel strongly, that this project is probably years down the road, given where they're at. I think that they should come back next year with some engineering and, estimates and a schedule in hand. I know they presented a schedule, but I also had concerns about the schedule, so I don't know if anyone else is in agreement with that, but I would recommend just coming back next year.
Is that a motion?
And funding at zero, yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
Can I actually ask for clarification, because I wasn't here last year? Did the group make recommendations for folks to say like, no thanks, but come back next year? Or was it just sort of,
I think it comes
how did
across
it work
as,
last time?
kind of as a no, but certainly everyone is always welcome to return.
To
So,
come back.
for example, Girls Inc. received a no last year, yet they're back, and they were successful
So
this year.
I could revise my, my motion is to not fund it, but with the general comment that I still think it's a good project, architecturally and historically, and that I think that they should come back next year.
Yes, I would love to fund this with some more updated information.
Could I tweak the numbers based on, Member Shea and, the chairman's, opinions? I'm in agreement with, Member Galvin and Brad. However, for purposes of encouraging them to go out and fundraise, I would reduce the number to 50,000. I don't think that's insulting. And, put the, but, I just think that, awarding them 100,000 is too much, but, for purposes of encouraging them to fundraise and, I think that's a fair number, but I'm new at this, so I'll take the board's guidance on this.
You are part of the board, and I think what we have to do in the sort of parliamentary procedure here, I believe we have to ask the maker of the motion if she's willing to accept that as an amendment, otherwise we have to vote on her motion.
I think I'm not willing to accept it.
Okay. Well, I think we'll call the question, I think, on your motion.
It's the defeat.
Well, it hasn't been voted yet.
Say that again?
So it is the motion,
The
though,
motion is to fund it at zero, or not fund it. That is so a yes vote is to not fund this project. A no vote would be to consider it, so. I guess we'll ask for a roll call on that.
Chairman Baky,
No.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Member Rourke,
No.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member Shea. No. Member DePesa.
Yes.
We end up,
I think we're split.
Raise
Four
no.
to four.
What was the? Was it 4-4?
It was 4-4.
what does that mean?
We've never had that before.
Eddie Benkel's coin toss?
Now we have to go to a neutral stadium. Well,
Could somebody make a different motion?
Yeah, I heard one.
I would make a motion to fund $50,000 to St. George's Church.
I'll second that.
okay. Any discussion on that? Should we call for a vote on that?
Vote.
All right, let's vote on that. Roll call for that.
Chairman Baky,
Yes.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Buchanan,
Yes.
Member Biasrose,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member Shea,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
Motion carries. Now we have $650,082 available. We're actually going to be making progress working on the smaller requests, and I can tell where we're headed at the end. So maybe we should talk about 635 Middlesex Street then. I think we have essentially two proposals on the table. One is to fund the full request. The other is to consider.
Don't worry, they have confessions on Saturday.
That debate happened. She said, he insulted me, you only gave him 10,000, like 5. I had to say,
Yeah.
still 45,000.
So, on this, 635 Middlesex, again, we have two proposals. One is to fund the full request. The other is to fund approximately half, maybe a little more than half of the request, maybe 100,000, and encourage them to utilize the LDFC program for the balance. There obviously could be a third option as well. Do we have a proposal for a motion to consider?
I'll make a motion to fund it $100,000.
Second on that. Okay. Member Butenheit's motion, Member Shea second. Any discussion on that? All right, roll call.
Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Butenhoff,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Shea,
Yes.
Member DePesa,
Yes.
Okay, that motion also carries. Even though it was not part of the motion, I definitely do encourage you to do indeed talk to the LDFC and please come back to us if there are procedural things that we might be able to help with as you explore that. So our final project that I think is before us, I think we all agreed that based on the city's recommendation, we're not considering Donahoe Park because we don't have enough money to do
Yeah.
both. We're doing the priority. What we have left by my count is 500 and
Sorry, just procedural, do we need to vote to not fund Donahue Park? Or do we just not?
well, I think we vote the recommendation of what to fund. We
Okay.
don't actually have to vote
And it's
what
just,
not to fund.
okay, perfect.
I mean, we can if you want.
Yeah.
You want to vote no to your own project?
No, thanks.
So I lost my train of thought. We have,
$550,082.
all right, so do we have a motion?
Yes.
Seconded.
To award $550,082 to O'Donnell Park.
Yes.
Any discussion on that? Roll call, please.
Chairman Bakey,
Yes.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Butenhoff,
Yes.
Member Myers Rose,
Yes.
Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Gallivan,
Yes.
Member Shea,
Yes.
Member DePesa.
Yes.
All right, so, well done, everybody, thank you. We do have a couple little housekeeping things we have to do at the end here, which is we do have to discuss our recommendations for the restrictions and conditions that need to be placed on some of these. So, starting with the housing, I guess I'd ask Dylan, are there parameters that we need to make sure we're sensitive to around an affordable housing restriction for the Hadley House project?
The property isn't being acquired with the money.
Yeah.
The length of the restrictions that the restriction board just has, if there's restrictions, it just has to be below 50% area median income.
So if there's a restriction, we have to require it to be below 50%?
Yeah, or whatever the standard is, it's not any constricted.
So if we don't put a restriction on it at all, it doesn't have to be below?
If we're not acquiring it, we don't have to put any restrictions?
My understanding, but it's obviously suggested that you do.
Yeah.
And why does it have to be at the 50% AMI level or below if it's not required at all?
I guess that only applies to projects that are acquired.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what they intend to do, and actually the Housing Authority often does do 50%.
I think it was
area
0 to
median.
30%.
I think that's what I
So
remember
we
too.
could do that and be in good shape. If we wanted to say 50% and below, they're gonna meet that. And it's not a terribly large amount of money we're putting into it, but it is also a housing authority who's likely to have it in affordable use in perpetuity anyway.
Yeah.
I
Could
do
we,
think it's a helpful precedent to have a restriction. But
could you make it like not less, you know, like no higher income than 50% and a restriction of no less than like 15 years or whatever, but then defer to the project, because this is just gonna be like some tiny portion of what they're needing to redevelop it. And I believe there was some issue with the Acre Crossing project where some of the restrictions kind of conflicted with some of the other funding sources that had specific restrictions that they required. So it's like, I don't wanna set us up to be in conflict
Yep.
with anything, so if we have an ability to kind of say, you know, units no higher than 50%, a restriction, you know, for no less than like 20 years, and then for whatever higher, and the other funding that they're pulling together. I don't know if that's possible, but just.
sounds like it's very much possible. That sounds like a good idea and almost sounds like a motion.
Great.
So what, did you say 15 years or 20 years?
I said 20,
Okay.
so units available to people no higher than 50% AMI, and an affordability restriction for a minimum of 20 years.
And that we would be, I think where you're also going with that is that we'd be willing to defer to
A greater
more
restriction.
restrictive restriction that might be placed by a different.
Yeah.
Too many numbers, it sounds great.
Did you capture that, Dylan, or do we need to restate?
A
You got-
restriction of no less than 20 years for, individuals with no higher than 50% of your area median income.
And we are willing, so we save us a vote later, we are willing to defer or our restriction if another funding agency in the project at least meets those terms and has greater restriction on the property. Roll call on that.
Member Baiki?
Yes?
Vice Chair Foley?
Yes.
Member Butenham?
Yes.
Member Byajar?
Yes.
Member Rourke?
Yes.
Member Galvin?
Yes.
Member Shea?
Yes.
Member DePesa?
Yes.
So the historic preservation properties, actually, we'll get to this, they'll be the hardest ones. The park, it's under a park project, it's not under an open space project, so it doesn't need a open space restriction, right?
Right, and since it's already city property.
And is it already like a dedicated Article
It is
97
Article
park?
97 protected already.
Then I don't really think we need to do anything with that one, unless people feel we should. It would be belts and suspenders, anything we could do. Otherwise, Member Shea's old colleagues already have to vote a 2/3 majority to do anything.
I'm saying, what did he just say?
So the historic preservation ones, so do you have any procedural guidance for us on what we have to do or what we have to stay within in terms of any restrictions we place on this?
You can, the restriction, my understanding is it's probably on the whole property.
Mhm.
And, the length of the restriction is up to the committee, what you feel is reasonable. At least two of the properties are in the historic district right now.
Millbank for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, but 635 Middlesex Street, it's in the, is that in the district where the district extends from the canals?
I think it's the Middlesex Canal District.
Oh no, the Middlesex Canal's over on the other side of town.
It's one of the
What's that one?
districts
Pocket
that
Canal?
encompases many different,
Yeah.
I think that's one of, there's like 3 different overlapping downtown districts, and one of them includes the land that abuts all the canal waterways, and I think that's what picked this one up. But I don't know that that's the same as the downtown district that is jurisdictional for the historic board.
Like, since it's on the other side of
Yeah.
the overpass, it's not.
So I guess I would, even if it is, frankly, then they're already under a greater restriction, but again, if we're investing in these properties on the basis of historic preservation, I think it's a good idea for us to have a restriction of some sort, regardless of what. I'm not, I'm open to people's, I don't remember what we did last year for terms, other than it was not satisfactory to the Bell project, but was it a 15-year or was it a perpetuity, or what
I
did
think we did perpetuity.
There were perpetuity last year.
Feel personally pretty strongly that if you're committing historic preservation funds, like the point of it is to preserve historic properties, and having anything less than in perpetuity feels like counter to the idea of historic preservation to me.
Doesn't feel
So,
historic to not.
yeah. So it
history
would,
doesn't end in 20.
That's it.
it would be my recommendation that for any projects that are taking these funds under the historic preservation category, that we continue to have that restriction in perpetuity.
I agree entirely.
They can either take the money or not.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
The second? Sound right?
Second.
Any discussion on that? Ready for a roll call on that one? Yes.
Chair Fuller,
Yes.
Member Butenhead,
Yes.
Member Bizarro, Member Rourke,
Yes.
Member Galvin,
Yes.
Member Shea,
Yes.
Member DePisa.
Yes.
I think that concludes the deliberation portion. These, for the members of the public and the applicants who are here, what happens next is that our recommendation gets communicated to the city council. The city council will, at a meeting some Tuesday night in the next couple of weeks, will take up that recommendation. They may request, they don't have to, but they may request applicants to show up and be present to either present and or answer questions in their forum as well. They aren't required to do that, but they may. And then they will vote on an appropriations vote to endorse these. They have two choices: that they can indeed appropriate these recommended funds, or they can, I think they can appropriate less than the amount we recommended, or they can appropriate zero. What they cannot do is go back and say they really like Donahoe Park. If they do that, they have to basically ask it to come back here and ask us to reconsider first. So look for that on city council agendas. I don't know if I wouldn't count on any other communication necessarily going directly to you as applicants, so do keep an eye on the city council agendas over the next several weeks. I'm sure it will not be next Tuesday, but probably start looking the week after that.
Okay.
And the agendas come out, for those who aren't familiar with Lowell, the agendas come out on Friday afternoons and they're posted on the city website.
Okay,
So you don't have to come down to City Hall to find it.
thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, have a good night.
Thank you.
Do we have any other business notices or further comments?
What's the date of the next meeting?
That's the last order of business I was gonna propose. The next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, and the reason for that was in case we were unsuccessful this evening, which we have been successful. So I would entertain a motion to cancel the January 26th meeting for lack of business.
Second. I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any dissent, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we will not be meeting on the 26th, so I believe the next meeting of the committee is not until March. And I think that may have been the one you said you were gonna be out of town for.
I'll be a few miles south.
It will, you probably can zoom in if you want.
If he lets you into the meeting.
Yeah, right. Well, glad. I'm not that sophisticated.
Well, I could,
Visual only.
I can check in, but I'm sure I'll be put on mute. But no, I'll be,
Good for you. Good for you. Really nice. I believe that is also our public hearing, so we would definitely encourage folks to, I'm sure that an advertisement of some sort will get put together, but I encourage people to share that on social media and that sort of thing, to get the word out about that. It is really helpful to have community input in setting the priorities, and helping both applicants and us understand what community priorities are as we move forward. We will also have, as I was saying, the applicants, this will be before the city council. Assuming I'm not out of town, I will plan to be at whatever meetings it is, and I encourage and welcome any other members who want to be part of that as well, but not required if you have something
I'll
else
be
to
there
do on
anyway.
Tuesday night. Some of you will probably be there anyway. All right. Any motion to adjourn?
Can I just say for the record, prior to we adjourning, that I just want to thank Dylan for the work he's been doing with the committee. Our land use board team is woefully understaffed at the moment. And so I know a lot of work goes into preparation for tonight and getting us in front of the council with these recommendations. So I just wanted to sort of acknowledge Dylan's and the team's hard work on this and acknowledge that and recognize that.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you, Dylan. Good thing that the real talent stuck around.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
It doesn't take 3 requests. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and thank you all for a great discussion tonight. It was a good committee.
Thank you.